How's it, Rob? Today we're going to be talking about new tournaments in football. But as a starting trivia question, I want to ask you, can you tell me anything from the last FIFA Club World Cup? And when I say anything, I mean literally a result, who played in it, where it was, anything.
Um, did they Chelsea play in it? I feel like it wasn't Man City, but I can't. I have no idea.
It was
But
Man City because they won the Champions League in 22. They won the Champions League in May, and then they would play the subsequent Club World Cup because the winner of the Champions League qualifies. Which takes me on to my question because there's this whole discussion around the FIFA World Cup or FIFA Club World Cup and how this will be a new tournament and they bring in all the teams, etc. Which got me thinking, because there's been a lot of pushback against that. It's got me thinking, is there actually space in football for new tournaments?
I'm just gonna. We're gonna go with the hard answer of no. To be honest, it's just not. You've got eight. You got 8 million games going on a season anyway. I mean, even if you take out the international tournaments, you still got an extended Champions League. You've got Europa League. You've got Conference League. Most nations have the league plus at least one other trophy, if not two trophies. Like it's getting to the point of it being silly, really. And I remember we spoke about this in a different podcasts, but football fatigue for fans, let alone for players. Our players are always going to be fatigued. They're playing. But to be honest, part of the reason I enjoy like the Premier League is you get a break. You get a break and you get to reset and you get to reload for the next season. And specifically last year, I definitely got the end of the season. I was like, I'm done. I don't need to watch any more football. I don't really remember watching that much of the summer tournament either, because it's just like I just couldn't be asked, to be honest. I mean, the weather in the UK didn't help that much, but it was just one of those where I was like, I'm not, I'm not that asked really.
Yeah, so I was thinking, don't you think it's a problem for the game or like the innovation of the game? Because obviously over time sports develop and even tournament styles and stuff develop. If you just had all the different leagues and cups being played in the exact same format year after year for like 1 or 2 decades in a row, does that not risk making football stale as other sports around it grow and develop?
I don't think so. I think like there's nothing wrong with innovation necessarily, but innovation to the detriment of your players. Because I think that's the reason people watch football because it's entertaining, it's quick, and also you've got some of the most skillful people on the planet. You got like every single high level game is 22 the most skillful people on the planet. The one thing you really don't want to do as football in general is you don't want to overtire these players. You don't want to be in a situation where you're not able to put out your best 11 every single week. You don't want to play multiple games where it's why the League Cup, no one really cares that much about the League Cup because teams play their second team. I guess why it's considered a lesser competition because no team in the early stages, at least, plays their first 11, because why would you? You've got more important games, to be honest. And you don't want to end up in a situation where, the Champions League becomes that because you need to win the Premier League or you need to finish in a certain position in the Premier League to qualify for the Champions League. That gives you the revenue. And then you've got the Club World Cup, so you players don't get a break. And it's like, well, what's the point?
Do you quickly on the League Cup, do you think it would be a good way to make it relevant again if England gets that fifth spot of the league going to Champions League with this new format of the Champions League? What if in England they said, "Oh, we don't give fifth Champions League, we give the winner of the League Cup, and obviously if the winner already does qualify for the Champions League, then it goes to fifth, and then incentivizing those teams who are on the cusp of fourth and fifth, etc., to actually go for the League Cup as a way to get into the Champions League."
I mean, maybe, but I just don't see it. Because again, you're looking at the problem with it is, again, this early rounds, because when you get to the semi-final and the final, teams generally play a pretty good, 11. But it's more these early rounds where you've just got your team back, you've got to fight off a million international breaks, and you're trying to get a decent chemistry, and all your players are just getting more and more exhausted. And now you've got to deal with the League Cup where you're playing against Wimbledon on a random Tuesday night. It's like I don't really care. My third team should be able to beat Wimbledon, to be honest. Um, I think once you get to later stages, then maybe. But I just think there's no real way to incentivize the League Cup for the bigger teams.
That's a great little segue into where I want to take the conversation next, which is the FIFA Club World Cup. And that's being revamped as a tournament. So it's going to become a summer tournament, as in at the end of the season, it would take place. And I think it's going to 32 teams and go to the old World Cup style where you have 8 groups, 4 teams per group, and then the top 2 go through to knockouts, and that's how it's going to be played. So it'll be, I believe it's the last 4 winners of the Champions League plus either 2 or 4 of the next best placed teams by the UEFA rankings go off to the FIFA Club World Cup. So they got this tournament, obviously, and it's been a bit of and it hasn't even happened yet, but it's been a bit of a disaster behind the scenes because FIFA were wanting $4 billion for the commercial viewing rights. The best offer they've got so far is $1 billion. So they haven't signed a commercial partner. It hasn't been announced quite. It's going to be hosted in the USA as a 2025 May tournament in preparation for the World Cup because the conference, what do you call it? The Confederations Cup is no longer a thing, which used to be a tournament 1 year before the World Cup, which would allow the host nation to showcase they were ready to host the World Cup. So going back to the Club World Cup, there's no stadiums been announced yet and fixtures. The teams haven't been announced. Hotels can't be booked for fans. You can't buy tickets because you don't know where the games are going to be. And it's all a bit of a disaster. Do you think the lack of interest, because ultimately that's what it comes down to, do you think the lack of interest is just because there's too much football and they're not interested? Or do you think just the concept of a Club World Cup is the problem?
I think the concept of a Club World Cup is a problem, you know. It's one of those where, again, it's all well and good talking about, oh, we're going to get all the champions from around the world. But let's be real, European teams are going to win it every time because Europe is where all the money is. Europe's where all the talent is not in terms of talent that's grown, you know, but in terms of buying talent. Every great young player wants to go and play for Barcelona, Real Madrid, Man City, Bayern Munich. Those are the teams you want to go and play for. No one really wants to go. You don't see a European youngster saying, "My goal in life is to go play for Flamenco or to play for Real Salt Lake." You know, like it doesn't happen that way. And beyond everything, I also think, and I think this is also where they're going to run into a problem with the World Cup, is majority of your the majority of your fan base is in that European time zone. In all honesty, the majority of your diehard fan base is in that European time zone from England, then you moving into Africa, and then all the way out to the Baltics. You know, it's all within a 2 to 3 hour period. And then you're going the other side where realistically they're all 5, 6 hours behind. So what time the game's going to be played? And when you look into, and with the World Cup, there's actually a bit of jeopardy in terms of who's going to win. It's nations, there's a bit more rivalry. But in a Club World Cup, you're sitting there going, like, to be honest, Man City or Bayern or Real Madrid are going to win. Like, that's what's going to happen. I don't really care about the other teams because they're not going to win. There's no point in worrying about it.
Up till now, I think that's why there's no interest in the Club World Cup. It's not because there's only I think it's 7 teams actually, but it's not because there's only 7 teams in the tournament that people aren't watching it. It's because of what you're saying. Before the tournament's even started, you just know the European team is going to win. By making it 6 to 8 European teams means, okay, maybe now it's a decision between is it Real Madrid or Bayern, but it's still just one of those two. And because it's a summer tournament as well, you would have just finished watching Champions League semifinals and finals, which would probably include those teams anyway. So you probably 2 months ago, 1 month ago, even watched, say, Bayern play Real Madrid twice, maybe, and if it's a semifinal, home and away. Now you're just going to watch them a month later play it in the Club World Cup somewhere else. And I think there's a big concern that teams will now just use this as a preseason fitness thing, or because they'd say this tournament's hosted in the US, normally your big European teams, they like to go over to the US in the off season to kind of gain, fan popularity and things. They'll just use it as that rather than an opportunity, any sort of footballing merit situation. You mentioned at the League Cup, could they just pay the teams a bit more to incentivize them? That's what they've tried to do with this Club World Cup. So the initial offer was every team just for entering would get 50 million. And then if they got to, I think, a certain, not the final, I think, but into the knockouts, they'll get 100 million, which is quite lucrative even for the European teams. But since they can't generate the money from the commercial side, apparently they've been asking the teams, if we reduce the fee, would would you still come play? And teams like Real Madrid have already said no. As in, if they're not going to get the big money, they're not coming to play in the tournament. And if you start getting a situation where all the big teams start saying no, you end up with like the 6 teams from Europe or whatever being Brentford, Real Sociedad, Sassuolo from Italy, just random stuff like that. The tournament's going to fall apart very quickly.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. At the end of the day, you saw it with the Super League. It's a situation of the owners want money. That's what they want. They're not interested in the fan experience. They're not in. You could have the greatest fan experience competition in the world. It'll build you multitudes upon multitudes of fans and give your fans a great experience. But if you're only prepared to pay the club 1 million to do it, they're not interested because they can go and do something in Australia for 20, 30 million. That's what it boils down to. It's not so much about the fans, it's about how much commercial value are they getting out of it. And I think you've seen it in the failed Super League and the fact that this is what the clubs want, but fans don't want it. And I think you will start losing fans if you push for that kind of revenue generating model too fast. And I know specifically in the UK, there will be people who would rather go and switch teams and go and watch their local team in the Championship or in League One than deal with the Super League. And I think the Club World Cup is trying to capitalize on this idea of the Super League by going, oh yeah, we'll get all these all these people in. But fans have shown they're not that interested, and especially if you're going to end up in a situation where it is just this Champions League semi-final over and over again.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. Lots of different topics coming in across the board, from the League Cup to the FIFA Club World Cup. Hope you guys found it interesting, and I'd love to hear from you what you guys think of the FIFA Club World Cup, if you think it's got a future or it's just already doomed to fail before it started. Anyway, this has been Football Unspoken. Until next time.